Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best Served Cold panel. My name is Jane Jorgenson, and I'm a branch supervisor in Madison, Wisconsin. I'll be moderating the session today, and we'll be talking with a truly stellar group of authors who've written some amazing thrillers. I think you're going to love to hear about them. Please help me welcome the creative forces behind the books that we love. Ben Crump, whose Worse Than a Lie is coming out in February from Bantam Penguin Random House. Rachel Hawkins, who has The Storm coming out in January from St. Martin's Press, Macmillan. Mary Kubica, It's Not Her is coming out in February in a deluxe limited edition from Park Row HarperCollins. Brad Meltzer, The Viper coming out in January from William Morrow. And Lai Sanders with The Plans I Have for You, which is coming out in March from Simon & Schuster. Simon & Schuster. Welcome, everybody. All right, I'll jump right into our questions because we've got some great people to talk to, and I want everybody to hear about their books. Ben, your novel is a fast-paced, race-against-the-clock legal thriller, but you also explore larger societal issues involving the legal system, police corruption, and how those intersect for the Black community. How did you work to blend them into such a propulsive whole?
Well, thank you very much, Jane. And I'm very honored to be on this panel. When I think about Worse Than a Lie and introducing this character, Bo Lee Cooper, this civil rights lawyer who gallivants across the country fighting injustices, I have some familiarity with that, but I thought it would be very engaging to let people see behind the curtains of how the legal system truly can not only impact and devastate a family, but an entire community, and how if we work together to fight for truth, that justice is possible. And that is what Bo Lee Cooper endeavors to do in this introduction of his universe, his world of investigators, returning citizens who face trumped up charges, all working together to make a more perfect union for everybody. And you have this pace, this thriller that you got a certain amount of time to bring it all home. And that's what's so engaging about it, because the question is, you have video everywhere in America today. We know what happened, but can they finally overcome the system, the cover that allows so many of these excessive forces to be brushed under the rug? And so, in doing so, you see a climactic end where everybody plays a role. There are no characters that are just there by happenstance. And so I can't wait to share it with you all.
Great. Thank you. Rachel, when you're writing a novel with a story that has threads in the past and the present, talk about how you decide on an entry point when you're telling a story that has threads across generations.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in multiple timelines in all of my books, and also in bringing in things like newspaper articles or fake podcasts, things like that, that kind of help build that world and make it feel very grounded. Because my books can go to some sort of wild places. I feel like the more sort of grounded and familiar it can feel. So I'm always looking for things that I think will resonate with a modern audience, or that will make them feel like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see this happening. So that's kind of a starting point. What are the sort of most, it sounds silly to, to be like, what's the most interesting version of this, as opposed to like a boring version that no one wants to read? Like, obviously, you want it to be the most interesting version. But I think I'm always looking, when I'm looking at like where to start with a multi-generational storyline. My books are not necessarily Southern Gothic, even though I myself am Southern and the books are very Gothic, and sometimes they are set in the South. But I think I still do cling to that Faulkner line about the past is never dead, it's not even the past. So I'm always looking for those echoes. And so when I'm thinking about the moments that I want to use, or where do I start, I'm thinking best how I can use those scenes to really reinforce each other. This idea that this has all happened before and it's all going to happen again, due to all sorts of things, from like I've always said that my books are very much about what happens when you back women into corners, and what happens when you start taking choices away from people, and what desperate acts might they be moved to do to free themselves and to live a life on their own terms. And so, yeah, every time I'm thinking about, where to start, or how to have those are the moments I really want to reinforce. So that's always kind of my driving background.
Great. Thank you. Brad, Zig starts the novel thinking he's taking a positive step in his life by returning to a job that meant something to him. But the events of the story take him away from that work are actually what helps to heal him. Tell us about how or why you took him through this journey.
I don't consciously think about, oh, I got to do this or I got to do that. I find that at the end what I'm struggling with and what journey I'm on, and I'm just not smart enough to see it when I'm in it. But I know the book is what helps me work through it, and it's probably helpful to paint the opening moment is a guy named Andrew Fetchmeyer walks into a funeral home. Sounds like the best start to a good joke, and but he's holding a blue suit. And it's a suit he wants to be buried in, because if you're sick, which he is, and he's dying, which he is, and you have no family, you pick out what you wear to your own funeral. And I was obsessed with that idea. And today, if you go to a bank and you open up a bank account, they'll open up paperwork and the government will see what that paperwork is if they want. You can go to a UPS store and open up a PO box and they'll file paperwork. You can get a cookie jar that is now Wi-Fi enabled that'll tell you when someone steals the latest chocolate chip. We are just tracked everywhere. But if you go to a funeral home and you hand over the suit you want to be buried in and you hide something in that suit, you have the one untraceable hiding place.
I like
And
that.
as soon as he leaves there, Andrew Fetchmeyer is killed, and Zig obviously is our main character who uh, gets involved in this case and eventually finds what's in that suit and what's hidden there. So I just ruined chapter 1 of The Viper for you, but what it does for me is it gives Zig this starting point of I think I ever since my parents died, I've just been obsessed with death. And it took me 2 books into this to be, maybe that's what I'm struggling with. And of course, that's what Zig's struggling with. And it's that hole you're never going to get over. Anyone who has buried someone who is so close to them that they hit you at your core. I spent a long time going, I'm going to get over my parents' death. I'm going to get over it. And then I finally realized I'm never going to get over it. And I'm not supposed to get over it, because when someone that close to you dies, you don't get over it. What you do is you transform into someone different, some stronger in some ways, weaker in other ways, but you transform. And I think the journey to your question is what Zig is slowly starting to realize in this book.
Nice. Thanks. Lie. Shelley had a moment in her life when she lost it and went viral, but to her, it felt almost like she was never meant to have that successful life in the first place because of all the, things that have happened in her life. Talk to us about her journey and how you think she's doing by the end of the book.
Sure. So, just to set the context a little bit, the book starts with the protagonist, Shelley, in a really low place. Just a few months ago, she was living in New York. She was a law student at Columbia, and she was really hopeful that one day she'll be able to pull her single mom out of poverty. But then, unfortunately, she has a very public mental breakdown on the subway. It turns into a viral video. And as a result, she loses everything that she's been working for, and she has to move back to her hometown and work at a motel. So at the beginning of the story, she says that although what happened was devastating, it's also not super surprising to her, because coming from a lower middle class upbringing, she has always known that this idea of if you work hard, play by the rules, then you'll succeed, it's just a myth, right? She knows that even if she does make it into these institutions of privilege, her standing is always going to be very tenuous. So throughout the story, she is constantly grappling with her pessimism and her hope that if she sets fire to this whole system, maybe she could actually create some justice for herself.
Yeah. Thanks. Mary, I've always thought there's something kind of claustrophobic in this kind of vacation location in the middle of nowhere that your book is set. You captured that feeling well here and used it to build suspense from the start of the book. Talk a bit about the location of this thriller as a building block for the story.
Yeah, I'd love to. The setting is honestly one of my favorite things that about writing this book. Most of my books are set in more urban or suburban settings, and this is one that is fully rural. It's about two families, just to set the stage a little bit, that go on vacation together in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, and they rent a couple cottages. And overnight, a mother and a father in one of the cottages get murdered. And that isolated setting just really adds to the tension. You know, not only is it an incredibly wooded area, it's about a half a dozen cottages that are on a lake. So again, it's just really remote. There's a mention that the closest hospital is like they assume it's about 10 to 20 miles away. There are very few police in the town. So when they do have this crisis and they need help, it takes time for the police to get there. And then not only is there the physical isolation, but there's just that sense of being on vacation and being surrounded by both the setting, but also people that you don't know. So they're not familiar with the people who own the resort, or the people who are vacationing in the cottages around them, or the locals in town. So as this happens and they're trying to figure out who murdered these two individuals and try and protect the remaining survivors, they just don't know who they can trust.
Thank you. And as a Wisconsinite, I did enjoy it from that perspective as well. Brad, Zig and Nola's relationship is complicated, to say the least. Can you tell us about how you have developed their bond over the course of the books?
Yeah, Zig is someone who believes that if you are a good person, you put good into the world and it will come back to you. And that's a beautiful idea. It's a completely naive idea, but it's an idea worth fighting for. And Nola believes that if you want the world to make sense, you got to grab it by the throat and force it to make sense, especially when you see injustice, which is also an idea worth fighting for. And I think this is now the third book with these characters, and again, it took me 3 books to figure it out, is all I realized is they're both sides of me. I firmly believe that if you put good into the world and be a good person, that's how you make the world a better place. I also firmly believe when you see injustice and you see something wrong, you got to use your voice, stand up and say, enough already, enough. And listen, we see it in libraries right now, what's happening to libraries. It's disgusting. And, I think all I've been trying to do and struggling with, and I didn't realize it, is just trying to figure out which side of my brain is the correct one, the war side or the peace side. And of course, they're both right. There is not one view that's right. There are times and places for both of them. And I think for me, trying to figure them out is just, it's just the books are just my way of working through, as I said, those things that I'm dealing with. And in this book in particular, I just recently was with my dad. I always told this story about my dad that, this way he really kind of messed up our whole family dynamic and made this giant mistake. And I always tell this story with such venom and hatred for all the pain that he caused the whole family, and what a jerk, and why did he do that? And then recently I was like, well, wait, but I forgot this one part of the story, this part where he was actually trying to help the family. And I forgot that part because I was so lost in my own anger, so lost in what I had to deal with in my own self-centered view. And what you're seeing in the book is just Zig and Nola experiencing that, realizing that in the story they've been telling about themselves, they left out some key parts, and the book helps them find those key parts. So I don't really, to me, as I bring them forward, I'm just listening to them and their problems, and in turn, of course, listening to my own, hopefully.
Mary, Courtney thinks she knows her family, but finds as the book progresses that there has been much that she hasn't seen, and her discoveries leave her uncertain who to trust. Talk a bit about how that personal tension can help to build the larger thrills of your book.
Yeah, so Courtney is one of my 2 narrators in the book, and she is one of the survivors after these murders happen, and she's trying to protect those that are still alive and find out who killed her brother and sister-in-law, and she begins to suspect pretty much everyone around her. As she starts to discover things. And, I think that she's very skeptical, for one. And, I think that as all of us know, a large percentage of people are killed by someone that they know. So as she, starts to dig a little bit deeper into this story, into this mystery, and little things start presenting themselves, revealing themselves to her, she starts to just sort of doubt everybody. And again, it's this isolated setting. There aren't that many characters in the book to begin with, so there aren't really that many, potential suspects. And I think that, I'm sort of a big believer that you can really only know as much about somebody else as they're willing to reveal to you. So even sometimes, our closest friends or our loved ones might be harboring secrets. And I like to really dive into that in a number of my books and just really get into people's heads and really sort of just explore that concept of people hiding secrets and trying to get to the bottom of that. And Courtney very much has to do that. And the more she starts to suspect those in her life, the more alone she feels in this search.
Thank you. Bly, both of your protagonists felt defined by how the world viewed them after a pivotal crash and burn moment in their lives. How did you use those moments to set them on their journeys, and about how it talk to us about how it caused them to intersect?
Of course. So the book has two main characters, Shelley and Sophia, and it's told through two timelines that I intended to serve as mirrors to one another. Sophia's story takes place in 2004 when the impact of her public humiliation moment is contained because it's just before Facebook and other forms of social media really took off. But for Shelley, her incident happens in 2016, and that's very different because it gets caught on video, goes viral on Twitter, and just blows up her life. So when Sophia approaches Shelley to say, I know exactly what it was like to go through something like this, and that's why I can help you, I think it's a genuine act of mentorship and wanting to save another woman from what she went through. But of course, the two people are very different. One always sees the worst in people, one is very naive, one is desperate for love and kindness and acceptance, and the other one has really much darker motives. So I think if you read this book, you'll see that this mentorship relationship goes off the tracks pretty quickly.
And in a very great way. Loved it. Ben, Bo Lee grew up seeing how the police and legal system can be so unjust, especially for Black men. Tell us about his choice to be an attorney and why he would want to work within the system. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Certainly, that most of a person's perspective and perception, I was just listening to Brad talk when he was a child, is shaped when we are children and what we see. And I'm giving a speech later this afternoon, and as a civil rights lawyer, I think about everything going on in America now. I saw a sign on the social media that said, there's a little Hispanic girl somewhere in a closet writing a diary. And I also, with that question, think about what Malcolm X said. He had a quote said, you can kill the lion, but what will become of the cubs? And so in the very beginning of the book, there's a brief prologue that Bo Lee is with his Black family and their Black community, and a white person accuses a Black man of a crime. Everybody in the community knows he's innocent, but it doesn't matter. All those Black people cannot tell the truth for fear of retribution to them. And so Bo Lee grows up like so many young people and say, when I become a man, I'm going to challenge this. I'm going to change this system. And so when this terrible incident happened where these 4 white officers shoot this off-duty Black police officer, and it's in Chicago on the night of the 2008 presidential election, he is summoned almost from his soul to say, I have to take this on and try to fight the Chicago system and the criminal justice system that has always been, oppressive to Black people, especially Black men. And so that's the setup for the book, but it shows that people are shaped as young people to say, this is what I hope to do in life. This is my calling. And the book is set against that. And it's really the whole criminal justice system, unreasonable bail and all of that, and that people never really have to think about unless they live in that world. You're the victim, but they plan on you being in jail forever and not even having a trial because you can't afford the bail. Those issues are explored greatly in this thriller.
They certainly are, and to great effect. Thank you. Rachel, each of your characters has what they think they know about events, kind of, I think, is calling back to what Brad and Ben were saying, and each holds pieces of the bigger puzzle, all of which feels true for what it means to be part of a family and a community. We all have those pieces and bits of knowledge. What was most important to you in delving into their lives and secrets?
I think exactly that. The idea too that we all kind of have a bit of the story. I always find interesting because it's exactly true. Like as Brad was saying, like I've got memories like that of childhood too, where, I have like a memory of like my mom crying when she opened this lipstick at Christmas one time. And I was like, she really loves this lipstick. And only like later when I was an adult I was like, no, wait, there's something weird going on there. Of course, she doesn't remember it now. But things like that where you're like, um I told myself a certain story, and I mean that's what we all do in our lives, whether we write books or not. We're always telling ourselves the story of our lives, and we also tell ourselves the story of other people's lives, um which sometimes we just don't have it right. And so that's definitely something that I think all of my books explore, is that idea of this is the story I've been telling, this is what this event is, this is who I am, this is who they are, this is all of that, and I think I know. And I think also that also ties into that sort of very sort of Southern Gothic-y type vibe, though, of everybody's got their secrets, everybody's got their skeletons in the closet, um, and so yeah, I wanted it to very much feel like that all of these people are coming together for a reason, and there's almost something mystical about it. I say that a lot of the time that my books, when I'm plotting them, they always start out much more plotty, and there's much more sort of planned crime, as it were. And then in the draft, it just gets messier and more human, which I actually really like. That, like, for the most part, the people in my books, like they're never planning on murder and disaster and all this stuff happening, and these things would not have happened had this unique and very specific group of people not ended up in a very unique and specific situation. And so yeah, I'm always just looking for ways in which the characters can kind of again reflect each other. And in the storm, which is set in a small coastal town in Alabama that's been hit by many hurricanes, our main character, Geneva, who runs this hotel that is like legendary because it's like one of the only buildings that's never been destroyed in any of these like killer hurricanes. Geneva's lost her mom to dementia. So there was also that idea that her mother has secrets in her that she will never be able now to access, and that she's very aware of it. And so when Lo, a very scandalous young woman, or now older woman, but when she was young, was involved in a death of a very prominent politician's son during a hurricane, and when she realizes that Lo and her mother, Ellen, grew up together and were friends, like there's almost that idea too that maybe Lo actually has some of her mother's secrets as well. So yeah, it's all like kind of figuring out how these people sort of act as puzzle pieces for one another, whether they want to or not.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody listening into the panel, if you have any questions for our speakers, you can put them into the Q&A. And if we have time at the end, we'll ask a couple of them. So feel free to add your questions. Now I'm going to bump back to Mary, where Rachel's characters are grappling with a past they are aware of, even if they only have bits and pieces. Yours face a nightmare scenario related to past events they barely know. Tell us about how you put that past to work and threaded it through the present for your characters.
Yeah, so let me start by saying that suspense readers are really smart, and most are like looking for that big twist from page 1 or 2, and so I always have that in the back of my mind when I'm writing. And so for me, making stories that are really layered and have a lot of depth is incredibly important, just to really add to that reading experience, but also to try and work in really as many different twists, not always like the big twist, but as many different mysteries and twists and just things for the readers to try and solve as possible. So with this book, again, just a little bit of background. I've already said how we have these two families that go on vacation together and rent a couple cottages, and overnight 2 people are murdered in one of the cottages. What I didn't say before was that their 14-year-old son is found alive. This is not a spoiler. It happens in like chapter 1. Is found alive in the cottage. He slept through the entire thing, and their 17-year-old daughter is missing, and they don't know if she's possibly another victim or if she is a suspect. So as Courtney, who's one of the survivors, starts to dig into all of this, there is so much to discover, and little by little, she starts to piece these things together, like the fact that Reese, the missing 17-year-old, had been having a relationship with an employee at this resort. But she also starts to discover that there was a similar disappearance about 5 years prior that she had no knowledge of. And so, of course, all of a sudden she wonders if going back to maybe Reese is a victim, and if these 2 disappearances of young girls are related. And so it just adds to that mystery. And again, that whole sense of isolation and not knowing who you can trust as she tries to really dig into this past mystery and solve not only that, but the present mystery.
Thanks. Lie. Sophia is in effect a con woman, or that's kind of how I saw her, who observes and finds a way to connect with each person she meets. With Shelley, she draws her in by calling on their shared backgrounds as the daughters of immigrants. How much of what she has with Shelley is the con and how much not?
First of all, I love this question. I think it shows a really astute observation on your part, so thank you. So when Sophia approaches Shelley to get her to go along with this revenge plot, she says to her, I understand everything that you have experienced. I know how hard it is to grow up with these cold, demanding Asian parents. I know how awful it is to be mistreated by white women who pretend to be progressive feminists. So what she's doing is actually a concept called forced teaming in psychology, where you very intensely manipulate someone into believing that you are on the same side, you're facing a common enemy, and you have to stick together. But even though she's being very manipulative, at the same time, she is also sincere. She does understand Shelley's pain. She does want to help her reclaim her power. She sees Shelley as the younger version of her own self that she wishes someone else had been brave enough to protect. So in that sense, I don't think she is a con woman in the traditional sense.
Thanks. Ben, Bo Lee is such a dynamic character who was faced with a daunting task. As you developed his story, how did you make sure to keep all the pieces moving while also giving space to the rest of the cast of characters? You said we're very, all played their part.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that always appealed to me about a good novel is when you had abstract dynamics become characters just like the individuals. And worse than a lie, you have these characters that I'm very fond of, people who, you know, went into the system, and whether they were guilty or it was a trumped up charge, they didn't let that define their existence. So, and them coming to work with Bo Lee on this case, whether it's Harpo or whether it's Capes or Princess Alvarez, the young woman who is Bo's co-counsel in the case, they all start to give their perspective on the system. And the Chicago system becomes a character. The police officers who are conspiring to say, stick to the line. And you have the one young officer who is troubled by it. And so all of that kind of builds up on this plot where will he survive? Will Hollis Montrose not only survive death because he's been shot 10 times, but will he survive the corruption the bullet from the courtroom may be the bullet that kills him worse than the police officer's bullet on the street. And so all the characters, I think, starts to give their perspective. And I want to believe the reader will understand, almost like one of my favorite plays and movies, A Few Good Men, that everybody character comes into play their profile, if you would say. And so I think in this question like this, it's a different kind of flavor that most readers won't know about their lives, but they can learn something from every character.
Thanks. Rachel, your book ties the personal history of your characters to the bigger history of the hurricanes that have passed through St. Medard's Bay. I hope I got that right.
That's right. Yeah.
Talk a bit about the formulation of your story using those touch points.
Yeah. So when I was kind of coming up with the idea of this book, I knew that I wanted to write a book about hurricanes. I grew up near the coast. I lived through a hurricane. My husband grew up near Mobile, so he's been through several. His family lost two, sort of, they had like those sort of old fashioned beach shacks that they used to build for, cheap, as opposed to like the McMansions they've got now. They had two of those wiped out by hurricanes. And in fact, it's like his family legend is that when his grandfather built the second one, when he was looking at the plans everywhere, it said put like 2 nails, he put 4. He, and all, and it didn't matter. When the hurricane came, the whole thing got washed away again. And I think that, one, I'm drawn to like natural disasters. Like, I don't know, like any little kid that got a book about Pompeii maybe a little bit too early in their life. And I think that what's interesting about hurricanes as natural disasters, A, like I said, I've lived through several. And B, they're one of the few that we know when they're coming. There's an anticipation to that. We track them for weeks and days, and we can see them coming like a movie monster kind of slowly approaching. Um, and there's also that sort of, it could turn at any minute. It could spin back out and go into the ocean and we'll all be okay. So I don't know. I just thought that there's something almost malevolent about that idea. But it's also great for a thriller because, like I said, it's one of the few natural disasters, like you can see it coming. And if maybe you wanted to get rid of someone, you could maybe make Mother Nature work with you. So that was one thing I was definitely interested in working on. But I was also, because again, like I said, my family has been through hurricanes. My husband's grandmother died of a heart attack as like a result of like a heart attack she had during a hurricane, which is a thing I touch on in the book, that it's not always just the people who are killed, in the storm. There's a lot of, sort of post traumatic stuff. So I was very sensitive of the fact that I never wanted to use real storms that could be, traumatic for readers. I never wanted to, exploit a real tragedy in that sense. But I also wanted to get a little smart with it, so there's a reason all the hurricanes are named after women, and all of the women are famous murderers. Which also just sort of lends to that kind of mythic sense that I really wanted this to have. That there's something, again, almost supernatural about the fact that these storms just keep hammering this one small town, which also lets you play with fun character stuff of like, why don't you leave? If you and anybody that knows anybody in a small town knows why they don't leave. And also that like this one hotel that just for whatever reason keeps standing for 100 years, and why. So those were all, like I said, just things that at the end of the day, the book is very much about like a young woman who was blamed for a death that maybe she had a hand in, maybe she didn't, but she was a 19-year-old girl. And the man that she was romantically involved with, who was the son of the governor of Alabama, was a 30-year-old married man, but she was the one that took all of that kind of. So like, it's to me, very modern story. It's very contemporary, but using the hurricanes and using the town and using these interludes of past storms allows it to feel a little bit more sort of, like I said, supernatural and a little bit mythic. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Brad, your novel is moving and has a complicated plot that has a lot of moving parts, a lot. I loved it. It was very like boom, 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 moving through there. How do you keep track of your plot elements and all those pieces? I really want to know.
When I was younger, I'd keep track in my head and I'd be like, whatever, I got it right here. The plot's here. Middle age, forget it, man. I cannot remember crap anymore. Um, in this book, I'm not joking. I wrote down part of the plot and I always talk it out with my wife. And then, I mean, we talked it out and I didn't write it down. I thought I wrote it down, but I couldn't. And I'm like, what was the thing that's going to happen here again? And she's like, didn't you write it down? I'm like, no, I didn't. And then I wound up, we had to recrack that part. I'm like, and so I came up with another solution. And then after I found the original solution and they were the same. And I was like, I'm at least consistent, right? And so I can't, so the answer to your question is I just have to write it down and ask what's next. But that's the key to the plot. I used to think was my brilliant mind plotting. It's not. It's not. Those books were like not as good as I thought they were. The best books I've ever written don't listen to me at all. They listen to the characters. And just to give you the example, like Nola as a character, I came from this idea. I was with the U.S. military on a base in Virginia, and they're taking me in this giant warehouse that looks like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, like the awesome archive library place where the Ark is. But instead of having the Ark, they have all these paintings and all this artwork, painted by Adolf Hitler, painted by generals, lieutenants, privates, everybody. I'm like, why is the military and the army have all this art? And they explained to me, and this is true, that since World War I, the army has had an actual painter on staff who paints disasters as they happen. And whether it's storming the beaches of Normandy, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's 9/11, there's always someone there painting it. And I'm like, you're telling me that everyone's racing in with guns blazing, and you got someone who's racing in with nothing but paintbrushes in their pocket. That guy sounds crazy. Like, I got to meet him. That's the craziest guy I've ever heard. I want to meet him. And they said, you mean her? You want to meet her? And my bias got the best of me. It was actually a woman named Amy Brown, who I named Nola Brown after. And right there, I knew the character, right? This character that's racing into disasters. And people race into disasters not because they're the bravest, but because they're running from something. When you're running into something, you're usually running away from something. And Nola's the best defined character I've ever created. And my plotting, to answer your question, is simple. I listen to what Nola tells me to do. And I know that sounds like the ridiculous writer thing. But I truly believe that when you feel the writer on the page, you feel the writer on the page. And the best books are the ones where you're just like, oh, Nola, don't do it, but she has to. She can't let that go. She's got to walk into that spot, not because the writer is going to need a cliffhanger, but because she's just cannot let an injustice go, cannot let a slight go, because her childhood is empty. And Zig, the compass, the North Star for these books is Zig will never have his daughter back. His daughter passed away, so he will never get his daughter back. And Nola comes from a broken family, and she will never have a father. Zig will never have a daughter. Nola will never have a father. What they have is each other. They don't even get along, but that's the only thing they have. And that's the plot. I know, like, I think Rachel said it is like, you can say all the things you want. Here's the murder. Here's the thing. Here's who done it. But they're all useless. What you care about most, and what you talked about in the first two questions you asked me, was tell me about those people. And I think that's why we read fiction, right? Is not to, I don't think our favorite books are the ones, and I owe librarians gave me my favorite books in the whole universe, right? I didn't have any money growing up, so I had a library card my grandmother had, and she took me to the library, and the librarian was like, here's your section. And I thought she literally meant those are my books, which they were, but they introduced me to my best new friends, right? Agatha Christie, Judy Blume. And what I was looking for was not where they were taking me or the adventures or the murder or anything else. Our favorite stories don't tell us about that other person. They tell us about ourselves. And I know that I'm not that special. So what Noel is dealing with, what Zig is dealing with, what all of us deal with in our lives are loss. And these, as Ben said, these childhood traumas, these things that we just haven't been able to close and figure out. And I think we look to our best fiction, I hope, to help us through that darkness and in some way, because it's hard. It is, life can be hard, and life can be amazing, life can be beautiful, and life can be messy. But in the end, having a book is like this beautiful lantern that can lead us through that darkness.
Thanks. lie, the underlying thread of feminine rage is powerful in your book, and getting revenge seems like an appealing idea that most of us, I'm sure, have probably mulled from time to time. Shelley, with Sophia's eager assistance, gets a try at fulfilling that wish, though it doesn't work out quite the way she'd hoped. Tell us about where that story thread came from and whether you feel there was any resolution for either woman.
Yeah, the rage in this book really comes from a very personal place. So I have complex PTSD, and I feel like every few years I go through like this difficult period where I'm very burnt out. I feel like nothing in life is working out, and I start thinking, I'm so tired of being this rabid animal that's like trapped in a human skin and pretending to be a functioning member of society. Like I just want to go live in the woods and eat dirt, but that's just a fantasy. So instead, I tried to use this book as a sandbox to play with and explore the question of what might happen if these two very angry and very traumatized women just completely rejected all of the ethics and the norms and rules that the rest of us are bound by, and they were just willing to do anything to express their rage. So the result was a story that was very fun and very cathartic to write.
It certainly was. Thank you. Rachel, the storm is told from multiple viewpoints. Talk about how you get into each character's head and how you're able to make sure that each of their voices come through.
Yeah, I think, and this kind of touches on what Brad was saying too, like the character is the most important thing. And that's, you can have the coolest plot in the world, but if you're not following people that you care about, it won't matter. And so character's always really where I start. It's actually, and I think that's why it's not that hard for me to like make them sound different because they're very specific in my head. And so that really helps. And so that's just kind of what I try to look for. Like, what is it about this person, like, that makes them express themselves the way that they do? So Geneva, our main character, she's drowning. Like her mother is, like I said, has dementia and is in a home. She's inherited this hotel that she loves and she feels pride in, but she also, often daydreams about blowing up because it just feels like it's just an albatross around her neck. So I knew that she sort of, like me, I'm not going to lie with that, covers that up a lot of the time with like sort of self-deprecating humor to the point where like another character eventually says like, why do you keep doing that? Like it's obvious this bothers you, stop making it a joke. Whereas Lo is somebody, because of what she went through, being accused of murder when she was only 19, having basically the entire world thinking that you're just some sort of like home wrecking, murdering slut, and again, you're a teenage girl. um, she as a result is so comfortable in her skin in her own way because she's been through the fire. Like, as I have Geneva say, like, what happens to somebody when their teenage diary has been in the National Enquirer? Either like they feel like they're an exposed nerve, or they're Low, who's like, well, I'm just unapologetically me now. And so as long as I was keeping those kind of thoughts in my head, like who is this person at their core, that really helps to be sure that everybody is sounding different, is again unique and specific, which I feel like are words I've used a million times today, but it's really important to me. So I'm really glad that you noticed that, because yeah, I really want them to feel like real people. And as long as you keep that in mind, they'll act accordingly.
All right, Ben, you have a large cast of characters and a complex plot. If a reader asked you, would you say that this is a plot or a character-driven novel, and why?
Yes, ma'am. I I am really enjoying this great panel because the stories are also incredible, and it made me reflect on Worse Than a Lie, and even think it's plot driven. Certainly, I agree with all the other authors that it's really about the characters, and they make the book. And so when you think about the plot from the beginning of the book, you have them trying to track down the young lady who videotaped the shooting on the cell phone from her apartment, who Black people naturally are afraid of police. And so they try to get away from them, and Bo is trying to race against time to get them. And then when they got them and they think, okay, we're going to get justice, but then the system starts to do what the system does. And he has that moment in court where he shocks everybody by moving for a speedy trial, which means 90 days all in. You gotta either save this man's life or he's going to for sure die in prison. And so the characters make up the foundation. And what I really want people to see in this book beyond the plot is the humanity in these Black characters, which is often denied in society, especially once you are labeled a convicted felon. Most of society say you have no redeeming qualities, even though we all know it's a very racist criminal justice system. They accept it, that this person isn't worthy of our consideration. So with this book, I pray that the readers will see that we're all worthy of consideration, and that just because they tell us something is legal doesn't make it right. Like Martin Luther King said, Hitler said everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany was legal, but that didn't make it right. So this book is a continuation of that with a dramatic aspect to it, and it celebrates Black humanity.
Nice, thank you. Mary, no one leaves your book emotionally unscathed, and it's clear that they'll be carrying the baggage of this vacation for a long time. Do you think there's hope for them going forward? And if you were to write it, what would their next chapter look like?
I love this question, Jane. To start to echo some Ben and Brad and Rachel, just characters are so important to me in my books. I mean, I think that we all strive to make our books really plot-driven and suspenseful, and the kind of books that readers just don't want to put down. But I think you need to have characters that really resonate with the reader in order to do that. Like, they need to be the reader needs to be pulled emotionally into their story and emotionally invested, to really want to see the book through to the end and to care about what happens to these characters. And you're absolutely right that most of my characters they don't leave the book emotionally unscathed, which is true for many of my books. And I can't be specific about how I would write that next chapter without giving too much away, but I do like to leave my books with an ounce of hope, because again, they've been through these horrible things, and in this book alone, people have been murdered. We have children that have been orphans. Somebody among them might be a murderer. And so everybody is in one way or another physically or emotionally changed. And so I really like to just kind of suggest at the end that there is that hope, or that there's the possibility of fresh starts and just, really like rebuilding, and that some relationships might be reconciled and things like that. Just to leave the reader, they don't have all the answers. They don't know exactly where it's going to go from here, but to leave the reader with that idea of hope. I've been asked in the past if I ever have plans to write a series, and I always say that by the end of my books, I have pretty much destroyed most of my characters in one way or another. So I just have to let them go and move on.
All right. And Brad, Zig and Roddy's investigation is deeply layered as they uncover one secret after another and inadvertently reveal aspects of their own lives through the process. Talk about how you threaded the personal complications of these people through your story. I think you have already, but
yeah, no, I mean, I think that as we all talked about that. I think everyone has hit that point. I think the thing that I find interesting as I go forward is how much more honest I'm willing to be with these characters and with my readers, with myself. I mean, if you look at an early interview I did, they'd be like, ask me a question, I'd be like, everything's great. It was like a baseball interview in Bull Durham, take it one game at a time, one book at a time. So happy to be here, and somewhere along the way, I just was like, today was a bad day. It wasn't an interesting day. I remember I used to always say, I didn't like small talk. Like I don't like small talk. I don't do small talk. I like going deep. And of course I didn't even realize like how ridiculously self-centered that is, if I'm somehow better at small talk than most people. But I think what I was doing as a writer is the reason I wasn't good at small talk is I wasn't listening. I wasn't listening anymore. I used to think that writing was about my creativity. I'm creative. And what I've come to realize as I get older, is that I think writing is just about control for me. I can only speak for myself, right? But in every book, every character does exactly what I want them to do. They say what I want them to say. The ending is as good as I want to make it. And the characters that I want to hurt are hurt at the end. The ones I want to heal are healed at the end. And boy, doesn't that make my life a lot easier than my childhood was. And and of course, I'm sure it has to do with creativity and having to do with, like, I love writing dialogue. I love making people laugh. I love doing all that stuff. But to answer again, to get around to your question, when it comes to Zig and when it comes to Roddy and when it comes to Nolan, what they're doing in this book, I know what their arc is. In the beginning, I used to just plot a book and then I'd say, like, and here's the character and I'll put him in. But now I need to know how each of them is going to transform. What happens to Roddy in this book was planned from before I started the book. What happens to Zig in this book before I started the book. What happened to Nolan in this book before I started the book. And to me, it's just being very honest that no one's life is simple. No one's life is easy. You heard what, I said. I mean, that was a beautiful thing she said about, just having, that was such an honest answer about just feeling like I'm so hurt that I just want to escape. And my God, does everyone in the world who listens to that have a moment where they're just like, this is hard. And I'd rather get to librarians' questions because they are far smarter than my rambling, but I will end it just simply by saying thank you for letting us ramble on, and thank you to the librarians who fight. I mean, they are fighting on, life is not easy for anybody, but librarians right now, it's hard for. That's why I wanted to come here today, is just say thank you for that, and I appreciate it. So that's it.
Well, there haven't been any questions in the Q&A, so if anybody wants to put one in, I will say that I love the idea of writing as control because I'm a control freak. So hey, maybe I'll just write something, not for publish, but maybe I can just get my control issues out through the writing. So I'll do a quick round robin question. What's up next for everybody? I'm guessing Brad and Ben might have a next Bo Lee or a Zig and Nola. Maybe not. Maybe you're working on something else. I'll call on somebody. How about you, Ben? Are you working on a new Bo Lee? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, with things happening in the world, I feel compelled that we have to keep telling stories to inspire the next generation to believe that we're better than what we're seeing today in America.
Okay. How about you, Lai? Do you have something in the works?
Yes and no. I do have an idea, but I have serious writer's block, so I can't make any progress.
It'll come when it comes. We will hope for you. How about you, Mary?
Lai, you and I are right in there together. I'm working on the next idea, trying to like work through a couple ideas, but also dealing with some writer's block, which you would think, after a certain number of books, maybe it wouldn't happen, but I'm here to say it does.
Mm. And Brad, is Zig and Nola, are they coming back?
I was truly sitting there writing the new Zig and Nola, but before they come, because it takes me a long time to write a book. I used to write a book every 2 years. Now it's like every 3 or 4, because I do other books. So the next book, we actually had a book come out yesterday. We're doing it's called The Nazi Conspiracy, about a real life secret plot to kill FDR, Stalin, and Churchill at the height of World War II. But we did a young adult version with Scholastic. So that just came out yesterday. So because we had so many kids just wanting to read that and they wanted to be age appropriate. So we did a young adult version of Nazi Conspiracy. And then next week, we come out with, we do a whole line of kids books, the Ordinary People Change the World series. So we did I Am Amelia Earhart, I Am Abraham Lincoln, I Am Rosa Parks. We had John Lewis help us with our Dr. King book. We had, Jane Goodall helped us with our I Am Jane Goodall book. And Billie Jean King spent 2 hours on the phone with me for her I Am Billie Jean King book. But next week is I Am Simone Biles, which is our first book about mental health. And they're illustrated biographies by me and Chris Eliopoulos. And I used to start by going, okay, who's popular? Amelia Earhart, Abraham Lincoln, Rosa Parks. Obviously, we need books like that. But now I look at what kids need, and kids and adults we need some mental health help right now. And so I am Simone Biles is next week, and then we're doing I Am Princess Diana after that, which is a book about empathy, because I think we are, as a culture, screwing that up royally. The world needs more kindness and empathy rather than cruelty and venom. And I can't change the minds of adults. That's hard. But for a decade now, we've been arming a generation of kids with lessons of compassion and perseverance and kindness. And I'll take that fight any day.
Okay. And Rachel, I think we have just a couple seconds, but if you have something.
Yep, I've got a toxic marriage book that I'm working on right now, set in Belize. And then I also write romance as Aaron Sterling. So I've got people falling in love happily in a small town, and I'm working on both of them at the same time. So who knows what will happen.
Well, thank you all very much. This was a really great discussion. And from the chat, I don't know if you're seeing all the Zooming chats, but everybody really has enjoyed it. So I want to thank you all for your time. I have a feeling we'll be wrapping up in just a moment, and I will hope to read all your next books soon.